The Mind.Shift podcasts are brought to you by the Quantum Living Corporation and are based on the emotional alchemy principles of Dr. Craig Farney, whose goal is to rewrite the human operating system, one thought at a time.
Welcome to Mind Shift with the Emotional Alchemist, where transformation begins from the inside out. I'm Dr. Craig Farney, and I help people like you every day uncover the beliefs that run their lives, which then allows me to help them rewire their subconscious thinking and help them finally to begin to feel at peace within their own skin. So welcome back to another episode of Mind Shift with the Emotional Alchemist. Today I have a very special guest from my BNI group again. This is TJ Lawson from, and remind me the name of the insurance
group. It is Insurance Solutions of South Central Kansas is the name we use. So kind of just an independent agency here in Wichita.
Gotcha. And you've been doing that how long?
I've been doing that for almost 6 years now. I think a little right in that ballpark of 6 years. It kind of all runs together. But I think since August of 2019, if I remember right.
Right. And you kind of have an interesting journey of how you got to it. So give us just kind of a quick overview.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was in nonprofit leadership as a pastor for years and years, and that was kind of what I did and enjoyed getting to do that, and kind of had hit a point where I knew that I was going to make a transition, but didn't really want to leave ministry necessarily because I enjoyed it so much of getting to be a part of the community and getting to be a part of a church community in particular. But we knew that we needed to do something, and that staying in Wichita was really what we wanted to do. We didn't feel like it was time to leave Wichita. We love this community and love kind of getting to raise our kids here and the benefits of being in a place like this. And so I was trying to figure out, what do I do then? What do I do with myself? And, I've been doing this for over a decade, and a buddy of mine said, "Hey, you should come work with me." And I was like, "No, nobody likes insurance. I'm not doing that." And he's like, "No, you should think about it." And he came and we went to lunch and we're talking through it a little bit. And he's like, "You should just come meet with me. I'm going to go meet with a couple clients here. Why don't you come with me?" And I was like, "Okay, yeah, I got nothing else to do. I'll go with you."
Right.
And I walked away from that first appointment. And at no point did he ever bring up "Hey, here's how much money you're going to make. Here's the commissions." There was none of that stuff because as somebody who's a pastor for a long time, that's not necessarily what motivates you. Despite what I think people believe about churches and pastors and stuff, they don't get paid that great. They're doing fine, but they are right within a school teacher, usually a little bit below school teachers because of the benefits are not nearly as good as most school environments offer.
Right.
And so, but money wasn't what motivated me. It was wanting to help people. And we walked away from that first appointment and I was like, "Oh, that's what we're doing here is we're helping people." And it was a no-brainer for me.
So you and I met for what's called a one-to-one a while back. And, we kind of had a very diverse conversation.
We did. We touched all kinds of topics.
So I kind of want to hit it, since this is about mindset, I want to hit it from this we'll start from this perspective. And I know it's going to go off into all kinds of different spider webs, but so you did ministry.
Yeah.
You also have a lot of other types of viewpoints that you delve into. We talked about quantum physics. And
yeah, absolutely.
I want to start from this perspective because most time people see science and religion as kind of in opposition of each other.
Right.
You don't.
No, not at all. I think that's I think it's a misreading of what science is there for. And I think science helps to explain the way the world works. It's a little bit like I think sometimes people elevate science to a point where it almost becomes a religion to them. That, "Hey, I'm doing science here. This is really important."
Right.
But what you're doing is you're using a ruler. And no matter how many measurements you take, that still can't explain what something's for or why it exists, no matter how good the ruler is. And so, but I think if you pair the two together, it does help to answer some of those greater questions and those bigger questions. And so I don't think there's anything to be afraid of in science, other than it kind of gets a little bit self-involved. It can get a little bit navel gazing at times. Science can definitely be in that vein. I think sometimes people who, one of the ways that I've heard some philosophers talk about is almost a scientism, where you have this kind of worship of science. And science sometimes forgets the fact that it there's a lot of people who believed in craniology, the idea that we're going to feel the bumps on your head and that's going to tell us, are you a delinquent person? What's wrong with you as a person? Sometimes you have, we forget that science was the reason that people push the idea of eugenics, which is, sometimes people call it a pseudoscience, which always drives me crazy because it's not. It's how cattle management works.
Right.
We pick the best parts of the herd and continue to cultivate for that. That's what any rancher in Kansas will do. It's just horrifically gross when you talk about human beings that way.
Right.
And I think that is a religion question. I think that is a what for question, a purpose question. And I don't know that science can always answer that.
I also find that most people think science is about facts and religion is about faith. And I don't think it's exactly that way. In fact, I find personally, there are very few things that are truly factual.
Yeah. And facts are, facts constantly shift. The world around us changes. Mm-hmm. And what we see is a no-brainer now. We there wasn't that long ago that was something that people wouldn't have believed or would have thought was a crazy idea. Mm-hmm. And so I think sometimes we get married to these belief structures mm-hmm. that make it so hard for us to interact with the way that the world really is.
Right.
And the new details that come in, we just, as we're continuing to grow and to learn and to figure things out, and there's still so many questions we don't have answers to that are just wild to me that we don't know how it works or mm-hmm. Where it comes from. There's like one of the little tidbits I was listening to this morning on a podcast was they were talking about it was a biologist who had been interviewed by Hank Green. I don't know if you've come across Hank Green mm-hmm. on the internet, but he mentioned that we don't know where bats go in the winter in Montana. We just don't know where they're at. They're not in the caves. We don't know. We just don't know where they're at yet.
They're vacationing in the Bahamas.
Maybe they go south for the winter.
Right.
So there's all these places where there's so much for us to continue to learn and to understand. And we only have these tiny slivers and slices of understanding. And I think sometimes we get a little puffed up that we have an answer and that answer may or may not hold water in 10, 15 years. I think it's always important to hold those things with a pretty loose hand and be willing to grow and to learn as much as we can.
I like to think of it a lot of times from that analogy of you have 5 blind men touching an elephant in different places, and they're going to go, an elephant is this, and describe a trunk, or they'll describe a tail or the ears. And yes, that's true. It's not the whole picture.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And if you go back and look at like some of the medieval drawings where they're trying to draw a picture of an elephant for the first time and they're just doing it based on descriptions. Right. They are the craziest looking animals. Because it's so hard to imagine something when you don't have words for it.
The same thing, you can take AI nowadays and you start to describe it and the pictures it comes up with are pretty hilarious. So tell me your journey.
Yeah,
so you grew up in history, and
I grew up in Eastern Kentucky. So I grew up kind of in Appalachia, almost in West Virginia, almost in Ohio, right up in the corner of the state.
Right.
And it's,
by the way, the KU fans won't hold that against.
That's right. I hope not. I am a Kentucky fan through and through, and that definitely makes me an odd man out here in Wichita.
You just got the K and the U in the wrong order.
I would argue we got it in the right order because you're the University of Kansas, but we're the University of Kentucky, so we get to be that because we are just a little bit higher in the hierarchy. My kids and I get so excited. My kids get so excited anytime we see a car that has like a Kentucky bumper sticker on it in Kansas because they just can't. There's so few of us out here. It is BBN travels well, but there's only a handful of us in Wichita.
Yeah. So back to your story.
Yeah. So I grew up in Eastern Kentucky. So I grew up kind of in the mountains there, or just at the foothills of the mountains, and grew up in an area with just a lot of poverty, and grew up in an area that was also beautiful. Had all of these advantages to where I grew up, but there's also a lot of downsides to growing up in parts of the country that are just some of the poorest parts of the United States. Elliott County, which is just south of the county that I grew up in, was for a long time the poorest county in the country. Wow. And so it's just an area that has a lot of struggles. And so coming out of that space was tough for me because I'm extremely dyslexic. And so it was a tough environment because again, I'm old enough that my assistant principal looked at my parents. I remember sitting in his office, and Mr. Littleton, if you ever see this, I still remember. And my parents were like, I think he's dyslexic because he's really struggling on these spelling tests,
Right.
and we're putting a lot of effort into this. We think he might be dyslexic. And Mr. Littleton looked at him and said, I think dyslexia is just an excuse for lazy kids. And so that kind of put this in my head that like, hey, that's part of who I am. And it took years for me to work through that and to kind of come through that. And so, but I also grew up in a house where my parents were really supportive, and they, continued to tell me how bright I was and encourage me. And, anytime a teacher gave positive feedback, they were right on it and really celebrating it well.
Good.
And so I came out of it with this idea that like, hey, this is part of who I am, but it doesn't have to be who I am. And so once I graduated high school, I actually decided like, hey, I want to be a reader. Like that's an important thing to me. And as crazy as this sounds, I never read an entire book in high school. It just never came up. And so people who read Catch-22 or The Catcher in the Rye or all those books, I just didn't. It just wasn't. I wasn't even asked to do it. It just didn't come up. And so I started reading when I was 19 is when I read my first book all the way through. And it took me years before I realized like I probably had maybe a 5th or 6th grade reading level when I left high school.
Wow.
And so it has been kind of a slow journey for me to get to the place now where I consistently read in the 50 to 70 books a year range.
I was going to say, you're a big consumer of material.
It definitely took time to get that. And
Right.
so that's part of where some of that interest comes from. It also just comes from, I always refer to myself as an enthusiastic generalist, that
Okay.
I'm not great at any one particular thing, but I'm interested in everything.
Okay.
And so if somebody is excited about something, I'm excited to hear them talk about it. And
Right.
so I enjoy getting to listen to anybody talk about what they're passionate about. And so that's kind of where that range of quirky, weird stuff that like I know just a little teeny bit about it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that's where, your and I's background kind of overlapped a little bit as we kind of grew up in very different environments than we kind of find ourselves now as adults. And I think
Right.
that's one of the challenges is then how do you, position yourself? How do you see yourself? Because those stories that are in your head as to who you are, those stories hang with you. Just out of curiosity, did you have a nickname as a kid growing up?
Oh, yeah.
What was your nickname?
One of them was Fernie.
Fernie. See,
Yes.
yeah, absolutely.
And of course, with my last name being Farney, Barney got thrown in there
Okay.
back in the good old days. But yeah, I also had one that I was the Cambodian refugee
Okay.
because I was a wrestler in high school. And
Yeah.
my senior year, I started at the start of wrestling season, I was about 135, 132.
Okay.
And I tried to get down to 98.
Oh my gosh. So
Yeah.
you were like shooting for that featherweight.
It was going for the lowest weight class.
Yeah. Is there something below featherweight? Is there? Okay.
98 pounds was when I was in high school was the lowest weight
Okay.
class. I got to like 99 and a half. And what did me in was it was around Christmas and somebody brought these popcorn
Yeah.
squares. It was like, almost the popcorn ball things. I'm like, I can't take it. I got to eat this.
Yeah.
And so I ended up wrestling 105 that year. But
Okay.
I was pretty thin.
Yeah.
I was, my parents were a little concerned. I had a couple of teachers that were concerned, and
Yeah.
there was,
There was some reason to be. I mean, that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and with the knowledge I have now, I'm like, oh, that was really not smart.
Yeah.
I mean, and I feel for my parents too, because, you want to support your kids and what they're passionate about and what they're seeking to do. And yet you also want them to be healthy. And that was an interesting time period for me, because I pushed myself in a way that most people don't.
Yeah. And I talk with my kids all the time about how, I graduated in 2000. So like kind of in that, early to mid 90s period in high school there. We had, we just didn't know what we know now.
Oh, yeah.
We just didn't understand nutrition the way we understand nutrition now. Protein shakes were just starting to be a relatively consistent thing. I remember when the GNC opened up in the mall near us, in Huntington. I say near us, it was like an hour away.
Right.
It was like this big deal, but it was just a very different view of health and fitness and training that is just so far removed from us now. And I think, if we can go back and say like, hey, that's probably not a great idea. I remember guys trying to make weight for different things and, sitting in the, sweatsuits in the sauna and, taking all the diuretics and, just ending up with tons of issues with their kidneys as, guys now that are my age and their middle age because of poor choices you made back in the day.
It's interesting too, because there is a dichotomy of it, or, because there are things that I learned too that I wouldn't have learned otherwise. I mean, there's a level of discipline that I attained that I wouldn't have had if I didn't go through that. So it's interesting to think back on those time periods. But
yeah, and there's so much that like I wish somebody would have tapped me on the shoulder and been like, hey, it's awesome that you're doing all these sports. It's awesome that you're doing this stuff, but the habit you're developing of like being able to eat a large pizza and a half by yourself. It's not a great habit to have as an adult. You just want to be mindful of that. Because it wasn't until I was like 30 that I was like, man, what am I doing? I'm not doing any sports, but I'm trying to consume calories like I'm doing multi-sport. What am I doing here? And I think those are just those kinds of pieces that, again, maybe people knew or didn't know, and maybe somebody did tap me on the shoulder and I was just too thick to remember. You kind of know everything when you're 15, 16 years old. So, but there definitely was some things I look back on. I'm like, man, I wish I would have gotten some different advice there. I wish I would have gotten the kind of insights that people now have and are offering up to kids, when it comes to sports and training and health long term.
We're going to come back to that concept because I want to keep pushing here a little bit your story. So you went into ministry. Why?
It was a tough decision for me in some ways because when I looked around at preachers at the time, I was like, well, I'm not that. I had the same minister for years and years. I had two guys that were at my church, a guy named Phil and a guy named Jeff. And I looked at Phil and I was like, man, I'm not Phil. He always wore a suit on, always looked really sharp. He was a great writer, and, always had a great witty turn of phrase. And I fully aware now that like I do have blow dried hair, but at the time he had blow dried hair and I was like, that's not me. And his style of preaching and humor was just not mine. And he was a phenomenal man, but just like I was like, okay, well, that's not quite where I'm at. And so I'm probably not a preacher. And I looked at Jeff, who was the youth minister of the church I grew up in. And I was like, well, I'm definitely not a youth minister because even at 16, 17, 18 years old, I knew that I was not a fun person in the sense, like, I don't like all-nighters. I don't like roller coasters. I enjoy a game, but only for a little bit.
Right.
I don't have the attention span to do hours of poker or anything like that. And so I was like, I don't really know what this looks like, but I feel like this is what I want to do, that I want to be involved in the church, that I want to find a way to do this. And so I was going to college kind of toward ministry and just unsure of what that looked like. And ultimately I found some people who were very different and gave me permission. A buddy of mine named Lito, who's actually a pastor here in town, we were talking about, you have to almost preach somebody else's sermons for a little bit because you have to try to find your voice. And
Gotcha.
You have to be careful not to lose yourself in the fact that you are writing and teaching and talking in somebody else's voice. You have to remember that that you're working on learning your own. But I think anytime you're trying to do communicating in a consistent way that it reflects who you are, it just takes some time. And for me, once I kind of found a couple of people that I was like, oh, I kind of get that. Like his humor's great.
Right.
I'm there. It gave me permission to kind of become who I am a
Right.
little bit. And so as I kind of grew, and especially the first couple of years, you're just trying to figure it out. I went through school and I crammed a 4-year education into 6. And so I was able to you kind of there's this moment that you have when you go to college, especially when you go to Bible college, but I think with any career, that you're like, man, I've just studied this for 4 years. Like, I got this down. And then you start doing it and you're like, I don't know anything. I just know so little.
Right.
And because I'd taken 6 years to do it, and I graduated with just right at 200 hours of undergrad credit, I realized that I didn't know what I was doing. Like, I knew good and well I had no business walking into a pulpit to preach somewhere at 22. Like, I was such a goober. But I kind of just was stumbled into it, so to speak. And my wife and I ended up out in Western Kansas. And we'd seen a commercial for the rebuilding of Greensburg. And I told my wife, I said, man, somebody's not helping a church get off the ground out there, or they're not planning a new church. They're really missing an opportunity. And the next day, it was on a Sunday night, we were down in Oklahoma City. The next day, we were back in Joplin, where we lived at the time. The school that I went to, Ozark, reached out and said, hey, there's a church that's looking for a pastor in this little town called Greensburg. And we think you might be a fit. Would you want to talk to them at all? Would that be something you'd be interested in? And I was like, probably. That seems that's too strong of a coincidence here. And so, and that was in April-ish, and by June, we'd moved to Greensburg and lived out there ever since. And so I remember walking into the pulpit the first time there at Greensburg Christian to preach, and looking at these people who had gone through this disaster, and some of the folks in our church who'd lost loved ones. One lady in particular, looking at her sitting on the front row, just smiling, and knowing that her husband died a little over a year ago in that tornado. Wow. And like, what am I going to tell her about what it means to follow Jesus? Like, what am I going to tell her about this? How am I going to teach her about faith? And it was just a very humbling experience. It was a super meaningful experience. They're just a phenomenal community of people, and really let me kind of grow into my own pretty tremendously out there. They were very patient with a young man who was kind of stumbling around trying to figure out his way into who he is. So, and that's ultimately kind of where, I found my feet as a person, I think, was out there. And we found our feet as a couple, which is one of the other sides of things. If people want to have a really strong marriage, if you can lock yourself in a one bedroom, one bathroom house, where the closest place to go out to eat is, 30 minutes away, you're going to learn to like each other, or it's not going to work. It's there's only two options to come out of the other side of that. And we have just really worked through a lot of our issues at the time. And so we've, had a great marriage, where we just crossed, I think it's 19 years. We're in 2006. That's 19. Yeah. Just crossed 19 years. So it's, it's funny when you get old, you lose the 19 years doesn't feel like 18, 19 years, something like that. I'm just missing a year here.
Somehow you're supposed to remember that automatically too. Yeah. Because I was talking earlier, it's 34 for me this year.
Man, that's a long time. Mm-hmm. Like I remember being 18 and meeting a 34-year-old adult and thinking, this person is so old. And now to be in a relationship that long, that's
Well,
you learn a lot about yourself too. I mean, you change over time, which is, I think, one of those things that we all fall into, that myth of history, that I have arrived, like I'm in my fully formed version of myself.
Oh yeah.
And, the truth is, what is your favorite meal now may not be your favorite meal in 10 years.
That's right.
You're just going to change. And, we consistently change all the time, and we just don't, because it's us, we don't always see that.
So as you continued in ministry, where did some of the other stuff you've dabbled into come into play?
Man, that's a good question. So partially, I've just always found just the world itself fascinating. The way that things fit together, the way that the why of things is a big deal. And, they're growing up in Appalachia too. One of the things I think is I was talking with somebody about this the other day, that's so different in Appalachia versus here, is Appalachia has this kind of haunted ethos that just doesn't exist necessarily in the Midwest. And so in what I mean by that is, like, I grew up with stories of chupacabras and other like cryptids and all this
Right.
like, kind of mythological monsters that were
Right.
in the woods and in the area, and stories about violence and murder and things that just kind of permeate that community. And it's not necessarily in a way that like it feels scary. It's not that it was scary per se, but it was just that there are things out there we don't understand. And so I grew up always being interested in what that was and what's out there and what is really going on. And a big part of that's my dad. My dad is is a professor and was a pastor for years as well. And he has just got a huge range of interests. And is somebody who, we kind of got on the internet early in life. He was a nerd.
Right.
And so we had we have telling my wife the other day, we had the modem. We actually set the phone on the cradle to dial into the message board, because that's all there was. There wasn't even websites yet. And so like I kind of got on the internet early as a kid. And so I just found it interesting that there was so many things you could learn and so much out there. I was definitely one of those kids who, had the Encarta CD from Microsoft with the encyclopedia on it. And I would like sit there and read through these articles. And that was just a huge part of kind of my own personality. And so it's kind of continued into adulthood in a way that like, I'm just always interested in trying to figure out what I don't know and, what that means for something else.
Do you ever find belief systems coming into conflict?
Yeah, I do. And that's one of my criticisms of most Christians' faith in particular, and how they would articulate their faith is if everything you believe makes sense to you, if everything you believe is perfectly reasonable and logical and easy, and there's not some embarrassment, there's not some frustration, there's not some things like, this isn't what I would do, but this is what I feel like it says I'm supposed to do, then I don't know that you have faith necessarily. I think you have a construct that you've made for yourself. And so for me, I'll often have ideas that sit together in that feel like they're in opposition to each other, and it's okay that they both exist at the same time. That doesn't get me too terribly worked up. I'm just assume that I'll figure it out one day or I won't, and it's okay that there's some tension there.
I find that interesting because especially if we start to dive into quantum physics and some of those concepts, I think there are people with some of the traditional faith beliefs that like, oh, that's hoodoo voodoo. That's, that's new age. We got to stay away from that. And I find it interesting how much of it comes from a fear-based place, even more than a faith-based place. I don't know that. I'm uncomfortable with that. I'm afraid of that. I can't talk about that.
Yeah. And I think part of it too, is we have this, this bias that somehow people before us were dumber than us because they didn't have electricity. And so we miss the fact that they weren't just different, they weren't just before us, they were us. I mean, if you and I were dropped back into 100 BCE, we would fit in. We wouldn't be any brighter or any dumber than anybody else. We would just be there with people. I mean, I think we forget how much they are similar to us. And so in that, sometimes when we look back at beliefs in the early church, for example, in Christianity, but also in, other religious traditions, we have this idea of like, oh, that's what they believe because they didn't have an answer.
Right.
But they were figuring the world out as best they could, given the circumstances. And especially like when people talk about like, oh, there's all these contradictions in the Bible, there's all this stuff that doesn't make sense. That wasn't a surprise to the early church. Like that wouldn't have been, they didn't think of the world the way that we do. We just miss how much we are shaped by our own culture. That's that David Foster Wallace story of the two fish, and one of them says to the other, this water feels great today. And then one looks at him and goes, what the hell's water? We just miss that we are so shaped by the kind of Western consumeristic, materialistic culture that it impacts all the things that we do. And, part of it is because anytime we're faced with a problem, almost always our answer is, let me go buy something.
Right.
There's a person I could pay to teach me to do this. There's a tool I could buy that'll fix this. Whereas that is not the approach of every other culture in the world, even now, and especially not throughout history. And so I think sometimes we miss how much we are shaped by this, and I think it influences in a negative way what we are willing to even challenge in our own ideas and willing to even push in our own ideas, because we just don't wrestle with those things. And so, like, one of those for me that comes from the physics realm is the idea that time is a created thing. Like, a time is not its own space, and
Right.
And so time is different in different places and at different speeds, which just doesn't make any sense at all.
Right.
But it's true, and people get, we can't even imagine what that really means, that time is a created thing, because we exist within it so much that it's hard for us to wrap our head around the fact that time is different at different places or at different speeds. And yet, that's part of, the whole, E equals MC squared, the whole idea of relativity from Einstein. That's fundamentally what he's saying.
Right.
And it's just just skips right over the top of most of us.
You said something I think is really important. You talked about holding what appears to be contradictory ideas in the same space. And I found that really important. In fact, I do a lot in what I do with what I call wordplay, that I think so many times we say this thing, but this thing.
Yeah.
And for the most part, I have gotten rid of the word but, and I put the word and in there.
Okay.
Because it allows both to exist, but almost forces a choice. It's like one or the other, or but tends to wipe out what you said before. It's like it counterbalances or it eliminates it.
Yeah.
And I'm going, you can have both be true at the same time.
Yeah. I think that's an important piece of, like, learning to live with that tension. Andy Stanley, who's a leader out of Atlanta,
Right.
he talks a lot about, that's the fundamental piece of leadership is
Right.
is that it's tensions to be managed. It's not
Yes.
problems to be solved necessarily.
Right. I agree. I think so many times you mentioned the word truth, and I think about this from the perspective of, we've talked about this. You have two people observe an accident and they have completely different stories.
Yeah.
And it's not that one's right and one's wrong. They're both true from that perspective.
Absolutely.
And so I think that applies so many times as well. And you mentioned culture. I think there's so many factors that we don't take into account, that we sometimes almost oversimplify things down into something I think what we really want is we want to be able to control it.
Yeah.
Because if I can get it into this box, now I can control it, as opposed to just living with it and experimenting and learning from what we're experiencing.
Yeah, man, I think that is I think that's partially why so many people, when it comes to new ideas, have a natural aversion to those new ideas. Is we want to we like the way things are, and the truth is, everybody likes the way things are in their life right now. And some people will say, no, I don't. I'm very frustrated with where my life is at. You would do something different then.
Right.
You're
at least comfortable with it enough that you're willing. It's
100%.
It's the known. And I think that's, we so much seek the known that anything that's unknown, we tend to avert.
Yeah. Anything that hurts, it is not something we're going to naturally do unless we feel inclined that it's important.
Right.
I think that's a tough place to be, because we miss the beauty of new things and new experiences and new ideas. We miss, just even being able to go back in our own life and reassess some of the things. Like, it's such a silly example, but I read Harry Potter years ago, and my kids had started rereading it a couple years back. And so I was like, I'm going to read it. Or my kids started reading it. So I was like, I'm going to reread it with them. I'm going to start, so I can kind of keep up. And I got about halfway through book 4, and I was like, man, this is I don't remember much of this. This is slipping. And I got to book 5, and I was like, I don't remember any of this. This is, I don't. And I got to book 6, and I was like, I don't think I finished this. But for years, I told people I read all Harry Potter.
Right.
But I guess I stopped halfway through book 4, somewhere in there. And book 5, 6, and 7 were a shock to me. I thought Harry and Hermione got married. Turns out that's not the case. Sorry if that's a spoiler for you. And so there was so much in there that I had created this story, and my brain did just a great job. It does exactly what it does is it takes those little bits of pieces and it fills in the rest of the story for me, even though it was made up. Like, it was just not accurate.
I find that one of the most fascinating aspects of existence.
Yeah.
That your brain fills in a story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially when we talk about truth and getting at what is truth. I think it's Joe Dispenza that says as much as half of the stories we tell ourselves are made up.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's crazy.
It is. It absolutely is.
And yet I'm going, yet it's not, because I think we have way more power, for lack of a better term, than we realize.
Yeah.
We're creating stories all the time.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, that is such it sounds like such a little thing of like, we're creating these stories and there's power in that.
Mm-hmm.
But that is, I mean, that's a huge part of what we carry into adulthood. Part of why I asked about what nicknames that you have is like, you know, when you think about yourself at your core, like, there's any of those names that pop into your head? Is there any that, you know, for me, those are there too. Like, I have those, this image of myself, you know, that, as much as even at the time when Mr. Littleton said, you know, dyslexia is not real, it's just an excuse for lazy kids, I knew in 4th grade that he was wrong. Like, right. I knew that he just didn't know what he's talking about. I knew that was one of the downsides of living in a place where we didn't have as much exposure to things as others, you know, and at the time I thought he was very old. I don't know how old he actually was. He was 80 in my head. And I'm sure that's not the case. But I definitely felt that it kind of those stories permeate who you are and carry through for a long time. And I remember being embarrassed of being from Appalachia. Like, I would tell people when I would be out as a kid that I wasn't from there. I'd make up some other place that I was from just because it was like, you know, the idea that people would make jokes about, you know, oh man, I can't believe you have all your teeth and you're wearing shoes. And now it's, you know, I see that is, you know, me trying to navigate the story I was being told even then.
Right.
And it's a hard thing to do. I mean, it's the stories that you try to overcome is, especially coming out of that place, is pretty tough. I mean, I don't know if you've ever read Barbara Kingsolver's book, Demon Copperhead. So it's a retelling of David Copperfield, and it's set in Appalachia, and it's set in the 90s. And my friend Rob, who's a physician out in Colorado, had recommended it to me, and he's from the Tennessee and in the Carolina area. Is where his family's from. And so he kind of grew up in a very similar space. He's like, oh, you're gonna like this book.
Right.
And it was so weird because it was one of the first times I'd ever read a book where they talked about people I'm from, and I know those people. Like, I know those kids in that story. I know those people. And you know, in the book, the main character Demon talks about, you know, trying to overcome the stereotypes in Appalachia, that it's one of the only places that people can still make fun of and it sounds okay. And, you know, he's talking, you know, there's this part in the book where he talks about talking to the media, and he says, you know, we can hear you. Like, we can hear what you're saying about us.
Right.
You know, when you call it flyover country, we hear you. We know that you're dismissing us, that you don't care about us, that you're marginalizing us. And I think there's a lot of truth in that those stories, carry a lot of weight and inform how we move forward. And for me, it's still been, you know, it's definitely a part of that. And there's a part of me that now as an adult, I have this pride in coming from a place that was like that. But at the time I remember being very embarrassed, you know, trying to hide it a little bit.
I find it so, because this is really at the heart of what I do, is you have a child aspect of you that's telling a story, and you have an adult aspect of you that's telling a story, and they're not the same story.
No, they're definitely not.
And more often than not, they're not really communicating. They're just talking to each other from the perspective of their story. And I think the most important thing you can do in just your own personal well-being is if you can actually learn to actually have a conversation with yourself.
Yeah.
As opposed to talk at yourself.
Yeah.
Because it is, I just had this interesting experience. So this July has been a tough month for me.
Yeah.
And I found myself very overwhelmed, feeling very weighed down and weary. And what's really, since we're talking about the out there stuff, what's interesting is I've had multiple other people that have kind of a similar personality to me go, yeah, I felt the same thing.
Yeah.
It just, there's something almost universal or societal or something going on. But what was interesting is I just finally hit this point of going, I feel depressed.
Yeah. Okay.
And here's what I believe is emotions come from the child part of us.
Yeah.
Logic comes from the adult part of us. And so what I realized is it was the child and some child part of me just screaming and just going, this is too much. I can't, I feel overwhelmed. And I finally just allowed myself to feel depressed. And it was what was really interesting about it is because I think most of us, we fight against feeling those feelings.
Yeah. We don't want to feel feelings. Yeah.
Right. And what was the weirdest thing for me though, is once I just allowed it, I just going, okay, I'm depressed. And I just was kind of sitting on the couch. I started laughing because all of a sudden I felt like almost giddy and happy inside. I'm like, this is weird. I feel depressed and I'm laughing.
Yeah. But something that I think comes from that, like giving yourself permission lets it become more manageable.
Yes.
Because when not, it's this taboo that you're trying to pretend like you're trying to muscle through. You're trying to pretend like it's not there.
Well, and it's like so many other things. The more you resist something, the more it pushes back.
Yeah.
There's a reason I felt what I felt. And the more I tried to push it down, the more it's going to keep coming back up. And I kind of use the analogy of the more that the parent tells the kid to be quiet, the more the kid's going to talk.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of that.
And I think it's that ties into there so much. And it ties into this concept you talked about because in your childhood, there's a story you've been told.
Yeah.
Or that you perceived or you believed, and you carry that into adulthood. And the child is talking to the adult and telling him, hey, I see this experience from this perspective.
Yeah.
And the adult's going to be quiet. It's this perspective.
Yeah.
And you're not whole. You're not complete. You're not coherent because you're not listening to each other. And what I find is either the child takes over or the parent takes over. And we tend to operate out of one extreme or the other.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of insight there because that is that permission to feel and to be it's crazy that is part of it. But I remember one of the things as a pastor, like one of the things they talk about in pastoral counseling is that sometimes you just show up. You're not there to fix anything.
Right.
And you're just giving people permission to be with you and to be with and you're there representing the church. You're there representing God in that space. And there's nothing you can do. You don't need to do anything. There's not a do here. You're just going to exist with these people. When you're in the hospital with a family and they've got a loved one who's terminal and coming to the end. And sometimes it is a great relief, and it feels terrible that it's a relief. There's been this long ongoing issue. There's been, cognitive decline like Alzheimer's or dementia or something that's been lasting for years. And so, the person has been 6 months or a year. They haven't even recognized their family. They can barely talk. They can barely eat. It's a devastating experience. And there's this relief that comes as they're passing. And sometimes it's okay. You just have to tell people it's okay to feel that way.
Right.
It's okay. It's okay to feel that way. It is okay to feel that way and to feel sad at the same time.
Right.
One of my kiddos in particular, we talk about feelings a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we talked about the other day is she was so mad at me, and I can't even remember what she was mad about. She was so mad at me, and it was over something relatively silly. And I was kind of leaning into it a little bit, and we were talking. And I was like, you feel mad, don't you? And she's like, yeah, I feel really mad. And I was like, yeah, but you're mad about. And then I kind of described the situation in a humorous way.
Right.
And she kind of looked at me, kind of smirked a little bit. I said, it feels kind of silly, doesn't it? And she goes, no. And I was like, it does though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And she's like, maybe a little. I said, isn't it weird that you could feel two feelings at the same time? And this kid looks at me and goes, yeah, it's because they're abstract nouns. And I hate them. So I was like, oh, fair enough. We only want it to be concrete. And I think, again, that comes back to that, that scientism is like, if only things that are concrete or real exist. And it's hard for us to know how to navigate in spaces where there's more ambiguity and there's more narrative that kind of drives things. There's more stories that we're telling than not. And we just sometimes struggle to give ourselves permission to sit in that space. And we try to pretend like it's not true.
I think that's part of what kind of drove some of my own spiritual crisis in a way too, is I hit this place where I'm just like, I got to figure something out. And it's almost like I took all my beliefs and just dumped them out. And I said, I'm going to push on them all.
Okay.
And if they hold, they hold. And if they don't, they don't.
Yeah.
Because what I'm finding sometimes too is a lot of stuff that we say we believe, we don't really believe.
Yeah.
At least not down to not in unison with both that inner child, inner parent. Because I found, and it's funny that you mentioned your daughter being mad at you. I was, and I'm to a degree still working through this aspect of feeling anger and even hatred towards God.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even and I finally came to this place where I'm just letting this all out.
Yeah.
Because you think God doesn't know anyway. Well, that doesn't make sense, because if he's all knowing, then he already knows. You're not hiding anything anyway. And I just came to this point where I'm like, I'm not hiding this anymore. I'm just going to be honest with myself. I'm just letting all this stuff come out. And it's interesting because I feel now that I have a healthier relationship than I did before.
Yeah.
Because if our kids have done that to us and we're okay, why would we not think the same applies?
I mean, that we go through so many mental gymnastics in the church trying to explain away, parts of the text that make us uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
There's all kinds of stuff in the Old Testament, but one of the ones that comes to mind is Jonah, running from God and being told to go to Nineveh, and he just doesn't want to do it. And he finally, goes in the fish, all that, he ends up in Nineveh, preaches, and the people repent. Right. And he's sitting outside and he is furious. And we don't know what to do with that as a church, because the idea that you would want people to be saved? No, not necessarily. That is the idea that everybody, we have these myths, and I'll pick on people who are a little more on the left than I would be politically. We have this idea of we just need to be kind to everybody. Everybody just needs to be kind and sweet, and we need to understand until we disagree politically, and then I'm going to call you terrible names because we want to other people so quickly.
Yes.
And we want to put people in a box that's over there. They're so different from us, and they just never are. It's anytime you have interaction with people, you realize how similar they are to you, and how much there's common ground in between us. And I remember years ago standing in Walmart waiting for them to come in with a new shipment of ammunition. This is back when you couldn't get 22 rounds to save your life.
Right. And
I stand there waiting and talking with a couple of people. And one of my friends was actually there. He's a guy from my church. He's an older guy. And we were talking about it. He's like, I just don't know how I feel about them using these drones in these wars. I don't know. And I was like, I don't either, man. I was like, it's weird. It's like you're killing people with remote control. I don't know that's always the best thing for us, as a culture. And this guy piped up who was standing next to me and goes, yeah, well, they don't care about life. And I was like, who doesn't care about life? And he's like, Afghanistan, people from Afghanistan. And I was like, that's like 3 million people in that country. You think not one of the people in that country care? There's nobody there, huh? Yeah. And I was like, I have friends who operate there. I have friends who are missionaries in Afghanistan at that moment. This is back when the Taliban was still in power, or I guess they are back in power now, which is real weird.
Right.
And, but it's that they're so different from us. And it's just once you have that time in and that exposure to other people, you begin to see it's not that different. And those stories that you are telling yourself begin to melt away. Mm-hmm. But again, we don't even see that those stories permeate us. And we don't see how much they affect us. And we make up these narratives and explanations as to why somebody else is doing something. And they're often just not true.
Right.
They're just not an accurate view of things. The reason they're doing this is because they hate this country. And I'm like, I don't know that that's the case.
So let me throw out a question for you to answer. How do we know what truth is? How do you decide? Because see, I have this conversation with a lot of people is, how do you decide what is true?
So it's a good question.
And I'm going to take it back to something I think we end up doing because it goes back to what you said when you were in school and you were told you're being lazy.
Yeah, I think for me, how do I know what's true? I think that there is a place in which it is pretty clear when you read Scripture that there is this there's something beyond us, and I think we can all kind of accept that that's there. I say we all can. I know lots of people who would say that it's not. I just think they're a little bit naive. Would be the way I would say that. We can only see so much visual spectrum of light. We can only hear so much visual or so much of the sound spectrum. We know that about ourselves.
Right.
There's so much that we don't understand about how the world works.
Mm-hmm.
We don't understand how things came to be. We have guesses and we have good explanations. I think one of the craziest ones is like why we don't have why we aren't more covered in fur and hair.
Right.
You don't get cut as easily. You're more durable.
Right.
You're better climate controlled. And people be like, well, we selected for sex. It was appealing because we wanted partners that looked this way. No other animal's ever done that. That's just not a thing. And so. There's no dogs that selectively bred themselves to be less hardy. It's just not a thing. And so this idea that, we just don't have a good explanation. We don't have a good explanation. And so all that comes back to, for me, I think that who God is in Scripture and who he's revealed himself to be is true. But I hold that with a pretty loose hand. I come from a tradition in which, one of the phrases we would say, and I believe it to my bones, is, that the Church of Jesus Christ is intentionally, essentially, and constitutionally one. And it consists of all those who follow his teachings. And so for me, I have a pretty broad view of like, hey, who's my brothers in Christ? Who's my sisters in Christ? And there's a lot of them that would disagrey. They would be like, I think you're wrong. I don't believe what you believe, so I'm not on your team. I'm like, that's all right. I'm still on your team. You cannot see me in mine. And so I have for me, I have a pretty small bucket of where I would put truth, and I'd ultimately put God there. But I'm also cognizant of the fact that I am barely able to understand when we talk about God. We see God as a being, and I think that's even the language around how we talk about God limits how we imagine God to be. Mm-hmm. And I think God is bigger than that. I think God is more than that. If time itself is created, and I believe the whole world is a creation, an extension of him, I think existence itself is in fact in God. And I think that's a hard thing. I don't even know what that means entirely, other than I think it is true. And so that's where what I would draw the line on what's true is pretty tight. And that being said, then I have smaller things that I would call true, but I'm also always open to them being not true, or try to be as much as I can, because there are things that I thought were true. I use this example early on in our marriage. I told people for decades my favorite color was yellow. Mm-hmm. Because when I was in second grade, somewhere like that, I decided that was my favorite color. Mm-hmm. And there was a day that I looked in my closet and I had nothing yellow. And no yellow shirts, no yellow hats, no yellow shoes.
Right.
No, my car wasn't yellow. My bed wasn't yellow. Nothing was yellow. Not a single thing in my life was yellow. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I think my favorite color is blue. I think I'm lying to myself here. And it's not that it wasn't true when I was saying it. It just wasn't as informed as who I am now. And so I think there's lots of those things in my own life that I can see as I tend to hold those in tension.
Yeah. There was a couple of points I had, and you even brought in something that you said just hit with me too, is, quantum physics basically says everything's energy.
Yeah,
everything's
absolutely.
Frequency. And I think the term, I really like the term resonate.
Okay.
When we resonate with something, we hold that as truth.
Yeah.
The other thing I think we do too is what makes sense to us, we hold as truth.
Right.
One of the discussions I have frequently, especially those that go, okay, Scripture is the foundation. Yeah. It's the standard. And I'm going, okay, you have to take a step before that.
Yeah.
You're making a decision that is truth.
Right.
And then it becomes your truth. Because it's almost like if you hold your own thought processes as the standard, no, Scripture's above that. I'm going, but you used your thought processes to get to that place first.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's what makes sense to us, because I think in some essence that's what we're talking about too, is all of us are seeking to make sense of what we experience.
Yeah, we're trying to understand the world. Yeah,
exactly. And I think one of the things that really bothers me too is so many times people are talking about the same basic concept and they're using a different word and they go, well, then we don't believe the same thing.
Yeah.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
You've just learned to use a different verbiage to describe the same experience.
And we sometimes hold those words up in a way that they don't really mean anything in particular. The meaning of them begins to shift, and we don't even realize that the language is changing around us. I think that's one of the challenges, I think, is like language itself is a fluid thing. It's a made up thing.
It is. And the other part with that too is the challenge with the human brain is the brain has association.
Yeah.
And I will tell you what my own personal journey was. For a long time, the word God actually was traumatic to me. Okay. Even though I don't necessarily have any of these major traumatic experiences, I associated God with a certain concept that was not beneficial to me.
Yeah.
And now that I kind of had to work to disassociate God from that term, because even just hearing the term would create a certain sensation within my body that I'm just like, this is not healthy.
Yeah.
And I'm associating this with something else, and that's what I've got to work through. So it's I find that interesting too.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I think even people that have more of an atheistic viewpoint, it isn't because they don't believe in God. It's because they had a negative association with that terminology. Yeah. And so now they can't hold that.
And again, we have this tendency to, even if somebody tells us something that we believe, hey, we don't, hey, this is what that group of people believes, and they're like, no, we don't believe that. Right. And we're like, well, you do though. You do. I know what you believe. It's like, we don't. I remember reading a Hindu writer, and he was making the case that Hinduism is a monotheistic religion,
right?
Which to me at the time, I was like, I can't. Nope, that's not at all the true case.
Right.
Hinduism is the only widespread polytheistic religion. That's what I've been taught. That's what I've been told. And in reading this author, I'm like, no, he's saying this. And I began to look, and like there's a long tradition within Hinduism that would see Hinduism as a monotheistic religion, and that these smaller beings, these demigods, are not, God, not existence itself. And
right.
So, and I think that's tough for us because we tend to make us decisions about what people believe or don't believe, and we don't realize that all of the bits and pieces that have gone into that. For me, one of the things that in the tradition I grew up with, we call, one of the slogans we would have was Bible things by Bible names. And that's what we want to. That's what we want to do. And so, we were a big church that really focused on baptism is, adult believer baptism, for the forgiveness of sins and the gift of the Holy Spirit. It is an important thing. And people out there be like, well, he's a baptism regenerationist. Like, no, that's what we believe God is doing the regeneration here, but the baptism is the moment that happens. But at the core, though, in the New Testament, it was written in Koine Greek and commonplace Greek and marketplace Greek. Mm-hmm. It's not written in classical Greek, which existed. That was kind of the elevated Greek for literature and for, formal Roman histories and those kinds of things. But this was all written in the language of the marketplace. It was written in the language of the everyday people. And the word baptizo just simply means dip. And in John, when it talks about Jesus dipping the bread into the wine with Judas,
right?
We translate that one as dip. We don't call it baptize, but it's baptize. He baptizes the bread.
Baptize that bread.
And what he doesn't do is he doesn't take it out and sprinkle it. He can pour it on there. It's just a theological point there. But it at the end of the day, we still use the term baptism because it sounds better, but it's just a transliteration of the Greek. And dipping probably is a better way to understand that. It's probably a better way to think about it. Mm-hmm. But that makes us sound less special. I'm just going to get dipped at church. It just doesn't sound as official. And so we like the pomp and the circumstances. Yeah. And I think that's part of it is the language that we use, the tension around that language informs how we see things, and it creates these beliefs, and it makes it really hard. Karl Barth, the famous Swiss theologian, he was always accused of being a universalist. He's like, I am absolutely not a universalist. I just believe that the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus is so powerful that whether people want it or not, it's going to save them. So you just think everything be saying, no. I think the death of Jesus is what that is. So he's saying something very specific, and we want to make assumptions about what that means. And so I think that's part of the challenge when it comes to talking to other people, but even talking to ourselves, is the words that we're using have a specific meaning, and that meaning changes. And if we're not careful, the meaning of what we're telling ourselves changes. And so that image of Barney as a kid, carries into your adulthood in ways that sometimes aren't healthy, and you don't see it until you pause and reflect on it.
Well, and that's the analogy I used, until you actually have a conversation with yourself.
Yeah.
It's amazing if you will just take the time, and instead of trying to prevent yourself from thinking, feeling, and just actually listen.
Yeah.
It is so profound. You said something that it struck a chord with me too, because you talked about your favorite color, yellow, and yet your behavior says it's blue.
Right. Absolutely.
And one of the things I thought of is, if you want to figure out what somebody believes, pay attention to their behavior.
Yeah.
They're telling you what they believe all the time. I look more at people's behavior and their body expressions than the words they use are important. It's also how they use the words. And it's what we think we believe is not always what we actually believe. You pay attention to what your behavior is, that tells you what you believe.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the things in the New Testament, when the New Testament writers talk about belief, I don't know that they would have had the really clear delineation of a mental set of doctrines that have to be checked versus a behavior that has to exist. And that dichotomy is pretty unique to us. There's a really famous essay called Paul and the Introspective Conscience of the West. And the author just making the case that, like, hey, we're a little too into ourselves. We think about ourselves in a way that ancient people just didn't. That just wasn't how they operated. And so we need to be aware of that when we come to the text and we listen to scripture.
That's a whole big, deeper subject, and we're coming to the end of our time. So we're going to definitely plan a follow-up.
Okay, sounds great.
Because we may have to do two, because you and I could keep going and keep going. There's one thing I think is, I gotta hit this point, because it's one of the questions I hate the most is when people go, "Are you a believer?"
Yeah,
I'm going, everybody's a believer.
Yeah, in something.
It's what do you believe in? And that drives me crazy. And I'm just like, it gets back to that same thing you said, is we want to put people in boxes so we know how to deal with them.
Yeah.
And I was talking to somebody else about this. I'm like, nobody fits in any box.
Yeah.
You're going to have an individual box for every person. And what's funny is that individual box fits in all the big box, because we all belong there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talk about this all the time, is my kids and I, is one of the things I tell them all the time is just remember that everybody is weird when you get up close.
Yeah.
Everybody does weird stuff when you get up close. From a distance, they look great. They look reasonable, but you get up close, they're behaving, they're making choices that you'd be like, that's weird. Why are they doing that?
That kind of hits on the last thing I want to touch on too, is this, what do you believe and why do you believe it?
Yeah.
Because we're talking about the difference between science and religion to a degree and most of us, I don't think very many people really know why they believe what they believe. Yeah. So many people are just living out what they've been told to believe. And so I'm going to tie in what is my favorite phrase right now, and I keep repeating it over and over in my room in the office here, is healing is not about fixing anything. And you kind of talked about this.
Yeah.
It's healing is about remembering who you are before you were told who to be.
Oh, okay.
I love that phrase, because most of us, take your experience in school. You were told you were lazy.
Yeah.
And fortunately for you, you had enough wherewithal that said, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
What if you had taken that on?
Yeah, I mean, and I did a little bit. I mean, that's the thing is like I can say that I didn't, but it definitely impacted my approach to things. And what it did in some negative ways is it changed my relationship with school and with teachers in a pretty fundamental way.
Right.
And while I had some okay teachers on and off through there, I didn't have a particularly strong feeling toward any of them because I had this belief that like, oh, they want me to be something that I'm just not. And so I'll just have to do something else outside of here. And it wasn't until much older that I realized like, hey, part of it was a self-defense mechanism. I didn't want to admit what I didn't know. I didn't want to admit that I had struggles. I didn't want to own up to the fact that I've struggled to read. I wanted to pretend like that wasn't a real thing. And so I avoided it instead of having the bigger conversation of like, hey, this is a reality here. How are you going to work through this? This is just the reality of who you are. This is a physical limitation here for you, and so to speak. Dyslexia is just going to be something you have to work through. It's not something you get to go around. And I tried to go around it for a long time. I tried to pretend like it wasn't a thing until into my young adulthood. And so I think that's a big part of it is like trying to figure out how to tell better stories to yourself that are still true to yourself and that are true to where you come from and who you are, but also recognize some of the limitations of yourself, which is, something that I struggle with. I don't, I am a middle-aged white guy in America. I'm convinced that with YouTube, I can do anything. Despite the fact that, Dunning and Kruger would say that is not the case. You are woefully inadequate in many areas. And I think that having to play with that a little bit personally made a difference for me, but it's definitely still there. And I think that your phrasing there is really strong of like, remember who you were before somebody told you who to be.
Well, I will end with this because I think this is where sometimes the difference between religion and science comes into play. Science can give you information.
Yeah.
I think where it errs is that it tells you what that means.
Yeah.
And because I think this is the biggest struggle for all of us is you were given some information and it meant something bad.
Yeah.
It wasn't like he's going, hey, you're dyslexic and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things we all tend to struggle with is whatever that weird part of us is, we assign a meaning to it. And I think that's where science can't really give you that answer. That's where faith, religion, whatever term you want to use comes into play and goes, you get to choose what the meaning is.
Yeah.
And I think if we actually could realize that we would stop assigning meaning based upon the unhealthy things that we were taught.
Okay.
And I think very few things truly are good or bad.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
They just are. And what I've found, the most peace comes when you come to this place that it just is. What do you do with it? It's what do we choose to do with what is, not the thing itself that's the big issue. So
100%. I mean, I think I just to echo that. One of my pet peeves is when people are like, well, dyslexia is really a superpower because it allows you to do these things. And maybe, but I can tell you right now, being an adult man, that it doesn't come up very often, but when I have to write a check, I have to go Google 1,000 because I can't spell 1,000. Mm-hmm. That's embarrassing. That is a pain. That is not a superpower.
It don't feel like no superpower.
No, and I think that's the part of it too, is like we have this, relentless optimism that somehow things are going to be, we're going to be able to turn every negative into a positive. Every cloud has a silver lining. And it's just not the case. Sometimes it's just who we are. Like it's just, we all kind of recognize at some point in our life, like, hey, I'm not going to grow up to be an NBA player. Like this is not going to happen. It's not in the cards for me here. But we tend to still kind of play these games with like, even dyslexia is one of those, ADHD is one of those. And we can pretend like there's powerful things in there. And there might be, but there's also negatives to it. And it just is. And if you can't handle it soberly, then I think sometimes it makes it even that much harder to navigate.
Well, I think that's also where that yin yang aspect comes into, because there's an emotional piece and a logic piece. And we try to make it one or the other, and it's both.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's the logical is that this is a superpower. Okay. Maybe there are some areas that it is beneficial. there's also painful areas.
Yeah.
And it's not one or the other, it's both. And I think that's even where our conversation about religion and science comes into play is I think science tends to be, it's not that it's all logical.
Yeah.
It's not that religion isn't logical. It's both of those.
It is.
Both of those pieces are there. And it's when we try to make it one or the other, it doesn't work as well.
Right. Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap it up.
Man.
TJ,
this is great.
I appreciate you coming.
Yeah. Hey, this is great. I appreciate you, Dr. Craig.
Yeah.
This has been a treat to get to sit down with you. Our first conversation that didn't get recorded was just a blast. And so it's been great.
I wish there was ways to go back and record conversations that I've had with one of my favorite examples, my cousin that I'm in business here with. We sat here and we had headphones on.
Okay.
But it wasn't on.
Okay.
And we just started having a conversation. And we were having a conversation around the word should.
Okay. Yeah.
We had a 2.5 hour conversation.
Yeah.
That I would have loved to have had recorded.
Yeah.
Because there were so many incredible things that came out of that conversation. And that's one of the things like why I love doing these podcasts is because there's something weird that happens when you put headphones on and are talking into a microphone that things start to come out that you go, I didn't realize that was there.
Absolutely. I'm sure I'm going to go back and listen to this and be like, I'm not sure that I believe what I said there. I said that out loud. Do I really believe that? So
good. Because that's the whole point of this conversation. So awesome. Real quick, do you want to give a quick shout out for your work? Yeah.
So I'm what I do as an independent insurance agent here in Wichita. I'm happy to help anybody who has any kind of needs insurance wise, whether it's home, auto, those kinds of things is really what I do. We ultimately are trying to be an advocate for you and with you. One of the things that we have said for a long time is we live in this community, and so we're not just trying to sell you the most expensive thing out there, or sell you stuff you don't need, but we're also not going to sit here and try to undersell what kind of coverage you actually need. So we're just trying to make sure you have what you need to cover what you have. And for me, the big one would be nothing should be a surprise when it comes to your insurance. You should know what's covered, what's not covered. If you get a bill and you're like, man, what is this? Because you didn't know that something wasn't covered. And so we're always trying to do that. And so you feel free to reach out, get TJ Lawson. You can Google me and I'll pop up. Be happy to try to help.
Yeah. And I can attest, TJ cares a lot about the education aspect and you understanding.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really important to him. So
awesome.
I will say thank
so
you
much
for joining us on an episode of Mind Shift with the Emotional Podcast. We will have a TJ come back because this conversation is not done.
Great.
So join us again next week for another episode of Mind Shift.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dr. Craig.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining the Mind.Shift podcast today. If this resonates, Dr. Farney would love to hear from you. Leave a review, message him on social media, or visit www.docerelifecenter.com to learn more about Dr. Farney and his approach to wellness. Until next time, keep alchemizing. The content of this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional mental health, medical, or therapeutic advice, diagnosis, or treatment. While Dr. Craig is passionate about emotional healing and personal growth, he is not acting as your personal therapist, counselor, or healthcare provider in this format. If you're experiencing significant emotional distress, mental health challenges, or physical ailments, he strongly encourages you to seek support from a licensed professional in your area. By listening, you agree to take full responsibility for your own well-being, decisions, and actions. You're the expert of your experience. This podcast is simply here to help support and inspire your healing journey.